By the third snowfall, the path to the monastery had not closed. It had disappeared. A monk could stand at the outer gate and look down toward the valley where the mule track should have been. But there was no track anymore. Only a white drop, a buried road, and a silence so complete it felt unnatural. From that moment on, the world below might as well have belonged to another century. No carts from the village, no pilgrims at the door, no letters, no fresh gossip, no warning, no rescue. Just the bell inside the walls telling 30 or 40 men when to wake, when to pray, when to eat, and when to keep moving. In a 15th-century Alpine monastery, winter was not weather. It was a lock, and once it turned, the monastery had to become its own world. The first defense was not courage, it was stone. The walls were thick because they had to be. Not decorative stone, not the romantic ruin people imagine now. Heavy, cold, practical walls that held a little heat and kept the mountain from entering all at once. The windows were narrow, the doors were reinforced. The cloister, so open and calm in summer, became a place of drifting corners and half-shoveled passages. Snow pressed against arches. Ice gathered where meltwater froze again before it could escape. Inside, every room had a job. The chapel guarded the spirit. The kitchen guarded the body. The cellar guarded the future. And the bell tower guarded time. That mattered more than it sounds, because when the snow erased the road, it also erased ordinary time. There were no market days to count, no travelers to mark the week, no changing news from the valley. So the monks lived by sound, matins before dawn, lauds in the blue dark, work, silence, reading, meal, more prayer, more work. The bell did not make life easy, it made life possible. Before the first storms, the cellarer had already begun his private war against hunger. Sacks of dried peas, bins of beans, hard rye loaves stacked like dull stones, barrels of salted vegetables, preserved fish if the house could afford it, cheese sealed away from greedy hands, a little wine kept for feast days, sickness, and the abbot's judgment. None of it was abundant. It was counted. Every ladle of broth had a future attached to it. Every heel of bread represented a day that had not happened yet. The kitchen fire became one of the monastery's most important lives. Not a symbol, a life. If the hearth died, the cold moved closer. If the broth thinned too far, weakness moved through the dormitory. If the stores were opened carelessly in December, February would punish them. So the cook worked like a man measuring time with a knife. Cut smaller, stretch further, waste nothing. Save the bones, save the fat, save the stale bread for the pot. Winter did not forgive romance. It rewarded planning. Before sunrise, the monks rose into the hardest cold of the day. Their breath showed in the corridors. Water left in a basin could wear a skin of ice by morning. A novice might touch the floor with bare feet and learn, instantly, that devotion had a temperature. The habit helped, but wool held dampness, hands cracked, joints stiffened, old injuries began to speak again. Still, the line of monks moved toward the chapel. because the body could complain, but the bell had already answered. This was not the peaceful quiet painted in later imagination. It was a trained quiet, footsteps softened by habit, voices kept low because there was nowhere for anger to travel except into the same faces, the same walls, the same bedchamber, night after night. At first, the silence seemed holy. Then it became heavy. Then it became something each man had to survive in his own mind. There was no crowd to disappear into, no road to walk until the temper cooled, no village noise to soften a memory. A man alone in the world can be distracted by distance. A monk snowed inside a mountain monastery had almost no distance left. He had himself. He had God. And sometimes that was not a comfort. The work did not stop because the road was gone. It changed shape. Outside labor shrank to emergencies, clearing a roof before the weight cracked a beam, cutting a channel through frozen runoff, digging out a door the wind had sealed overnight. A small group would wrap themselves in layered wool, take wooden shovels, and step out from the gate into a brightness so sharp it could hurt the eyes. The mountain looked still. That was the danger. Fresh snow could hide a broken edge. A familiar path could vanish into a drift. And somewhere across the valley, without warning, an avalanche could loosen from a slope and roll down with the deep animal sound of the whole mountain shifting its weight. Inside the walls, everyone would pause, not because the avalanche had reached them, because it reminded them what kind of world was waiting outside the door. The monastery was safe only by comparison. Roofs could fail. Stores could spoil, smoke could back up through a blocked flue, a fever could begin with one cough in the dormitory and become a count of empty places at prayer. The infirmarian kept his summer herbs like a second cellar. Thyme, sage, lavender, mountain plants dried in bundles and hung where dampness would not ruin them. He had ointments, warmed cloth, bitter teas, old medical learning, and prayer. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was not. The elderly were the first to feel winter taking inventory. A monk who had endured 40 winters might not endure the 41st. And because burial ground was locked beneath frozen earth, even death had to wait on the season. That is the part modern imagination often misses. The danger was not one dramatic night. It was repetition. The same cold hallway, the same dark rising, the same thin soup, the same wind at the wall. The same question in February that had already been asked in December. Will there be enough? And yet, inside that pressure, the monastery did not simply endure, it produced. In the scriptorium, candles burned low over parchment. A monk bent over a page with fingers stiff enough to make beauty painful. Ink thickened in the cold. Parchment curled if the air changed too quickly. A mistake could waste material that had taken labor, animal skin, tools, and money to prepare. So the copyist moved slowly, not lazily, precisely. A letter, a line, a margin, a correction. A small painted initial made brighter than the world outside. This was one of winter's contradictions. The same snow that trapped the monks also gave them the stillness to preserve what warmer months kept interrupting. Scripture, commentary, medicine, calendars, fragments of older learning that might have disappeared if someone, in a freezing room above a buried road, had not kept his hand steady. So the monastery became more than shelter. It became a memory machine. The mountain removed motion. The monks answered by saving knowledge. But the mind paid for that stillness. By midwinter, days began to blur. The calendar of saints became more real than the sky. A feast day might mean a better piece of cheese, a warmer cup, a hymn held a little longer in the chapel. Small changes became large mercy. A strip of honey on hard bread could feel like a message from another world. A candlelit vigil could divide one week from the next when the weather had made every window show the same color. And outside, the valley remained sealed. If a relative died below, the news could not climb. If a war shifted a border, the mountain did not care. If a village ran short of grain, no messenger could fight the pass. The monastery was not ignoring the world. The world had been cut away. That is why autumn mattered so much. Winter survival was decided before winter showed its teeth. The repaired roof, the stacked wood, the sealed grain, the dried herbs, the mended habits, the cleared drainage, the rules about portions, the obedience to routine. These were not minor chores. They were the invisible architecture of survival. The stone walls held back the snow, but discipline held back collapse. Then, slowly, the lock began to loosen. Not gently. Spring in the high mountains could arrive like a second danger. Snow softened. Roofs dripped. Paths turned to black mud and hidden ice. Water ran down channels with a force that could tear stones loose. The road did not reappear all at once. It returned in fragments. A dark line under the gate. A patch of exposed rock. A mule track showing itself like a scar. And one morning, perhaps after months with no visitor, a shape would appear below the monastery. A traveler, a messenger, a man from the valley climbing carefully through the thaw. Inside the gate, the monks would not celebrate like prisoners released. They would continue as they had continued, because the bell still rang, the bread still had to be cut, the chapel still had to be warmed, the dead still had to be remembered, the living still had to obey the hour. A winter inside a 15th-century Alpine monastery was not a story of escape. It was a story of a world made small enough to survive. Snow took away the road. Cold took away comfort. Silence took away distraction. But the monastery kept one thing moving: the bell. Hour after hour, prayer after prayer, task after task, until the valley returned. And the men inside those walls understood something the mountain had taught them without mercy. A road can vanish, a season can close like iron, but a life with order can keep breathing, even when the world outside has been erased.